Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us here on the 1st of June for our Ask an Appspacer webinar. We're going to give it a couple more minutes. We're a little early here, so we're going to give it a couple more minutes and we'll start right at the top of the hour. Thank you again for joining us. All right. It is 10 a.m. here in Dallas, Texas, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Can we get we're going to go ahead and start the recording here soon, and then once we get that started, we'll go ahead and continue. All right. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all here. 1st of June. Might as well start the month off on a happy foot. Thank you for joining us for this is our first ever annual best practices Ask an Appspacer. This is just an opportunity for all of our clients to come on. If you just got that task that you just need help with and would like to see a demo of, we thought this would be a perfect opportunity to get you on and see a demo live in person, so then you'll be able to handle it for yourself from here on out. My name is Damon Atkinson. I am a marketing manager here at Appspace. I'm just going to be a quick host. You'll hear my voice throughout asking questions. So before we get started, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping rules. Please keep microphones on mute so that everyone be able to hear Will as he's presenting. Please submit your questions through the GoToWebinar panel on your right-hand side. A lot of you all sent questions ahead of time, and we'll get to those. Some of the questions were very specific, so for those who are super specific that probably aren't best for like this type of forum, we're going to reach out to you by email, and then you can also go ahead and submit a support ticket in case you need help as well. But we'll reach out to you through email to get the answers to some of those questions. So we're going to try and answer as many of those as we can. As I said, some of you will be getting emails if we're not able to get to them all. And then this webinar will be available on demand. So if you if the demo you're not able to see it all, we'll be sending out the recording through email. You'll be able to watch it back and see Will handle all the great help that he's going to offer. And then also be sure to add Appspace to your safe sender list. That way that you can be sure that you receive the email with the link to the recording. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenters. So we've got Will White. He's a senior managing of sales engineering. He'll be handling the demos, showing you all the tasks, offering you all the great help. Smartest person here at Appspace, definitely smarter than me, two of the smartest people here at Appspace. And then Tom Pinello, he's our vice president of sales. So if you have any questions, pertaining to, any type of sales information, Tom is the man with the plan who can get you all that. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation and presenting displaying to Will, and then after that I will go ahead and we'll start reading out the questions.
All right, hey everybody. Hopefully my screen is coming through there. Looking good, sitting on the Appspace dashboard. All right. So thanks everybody for joining. I think we've got a pretty decent group looking at the attendee list here. We're gonna go through some questions. I think Damon has those organized, so I'll let him jump in with a few different topics here in a moment. But before we did, I just wanted to say hello to everybody, since you're gonna hear my voice a lot here over the next hour or so. I also just want to say on a personal note, right, this is kind of a new webinar format for us, right? This is a lot more kind of interactive, on demand, impromptu. You know, not a slick, well-rehearsed, polished presentation, because we are doing live questions. So, you know, bear with me as I click through and find the right things to show everybody, build some examples on the fly, that sort of thing. Just wanted to throw that out there, that again, it's a little bit of a different format. So hopefully it'll be fun, hopefully it'll be interesting. Hopefully we'll get some good questions, and excited to jump in. So Demond, I appreciate you letting me do a little intro there. I'll pass it back to you for what we want to jump into first.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you. First questions we have, we've got a couple questions on scheduling content.
Okay, yeah, I see those there. So we did have some questions come in ahead of time. Again, we're going to be monitoring the chat for any that come in while we're running through this. So if you have any questions on scheduling, for example, right now, feel free to drop them in, or questions about anything, right? Doesn't have to be on scheduling, anything on Appspace. We can dig into those. So scheduling in general, there were some very generalized questions around scheduling content. So I'm going to take just a minute to kind of dive into that. Some basic scheduling kind of practices and functionality here in Appspace. There were a couple of specific questions too, so we'll jump into that as well. First and foremost, in terms of content scheduling, of course, Appspace can support that, right? How we're going to you know, determine what content shows up where on any given screen, or things like that. That's typically done on the content itself within a channel. So I've loaded up Appspace here. This is my own little sandbox account. I've got a lot going on in it. Again, I wanted to use my kind of testing account, because I don't know where we're going to end up on the call today. I wanted to be able to pull up anything that I might have handy to show you all. But let's jump into a channel. So we're going to start with a playlist channel, simplest way to schedule content, though in our multi-zone templates, it's the same process. Essentially, you'd have your playlist of content. So I've got all my content here, right? I can click in to the settings for any given piece of content, like this expect more than coffee flyer that we're showing here, and actually adjust some scheduling. Scheduling in Appspace comes in two primary, I guess, maybe even more than two main kind of sections, or two main, I guess, functions. One is a basic schedule, right? You might guess schedule here is related to scheduling. And this is where you can determine what date range a piece of content is going to show up. So maybe this week here during June, the 13th to 17th, that Monday through Friday, or maybe all of June through all of July, something like that. You're essentially setting a start date and end date. You'll see you can even get down to the time of day. So we're starting at midnight, ending midnight on the 31st, but you can of course adjust that. Similarly, you can do what we call day parting. Day parting is super handy to show different things at different times throughout a day. So I could say, you know, this content should show every day, you know, 6 to noon, something like that, right? If you had morning time content, lunchtime content, after hour content, something along those lines. In fact, you could combine the two, right? So if on a certain day, you might use that initial schedule function to only show this content on a certain day, and then use day parting to show it maybe only during a certain time during that day. So between those two, you can kind of schedule what shows when. You can also, if you really want to get fancy with your scheduling, you can use what we call frequency restrictions to determine how often something is going to show up during that schedule. So maybe exactly 10 times an hour. So during that schedule we set up, right, it's going to show 10 times an hour during the hours that it's scheduled to show. So again, you get a lot of control there. One thing I do want to point out that's not always immediately apparent that I think is really cool is you can, of course, when you're in a channel, right, you've got your playlist here, you're adjusting scheduling, you can click in and do that. You can certainly go that route, you know, add content to your channel, right? Click that add button, set the scheduling right after that. But you can actually do that while you're actually adding content. So you can get that set before it even shows up in your playlist. So if I click add here, maybe go to my library, let's grab something that already exists. Select a piece of content, right? You can actually adjust that scheduling as you're adding that content to your channel. So this lovely stock photography of a hot desk here, I'll select that. You'll see down here it says one content item selected, edit scheduling and display properties. I can actually go ahead and set that scheduling and day parting stuff before I even add it to my channel. So super handy that way. Lets you get that set ahead of time, especially if it's very time sensitive content, right? You want to make sure that scheduling's set before it even shows up. You've got that option. You can also go the other route. So for those who don't know, you can actually add content to a channel directly from the content library. So if I go to the library here, right, I'm no longer in my channel, right click on that same image, click add to channel, and same thing. I could pick the channel I want to add it to, or channels, and I could adjust the scheduling while I do so. So again, we had some general questions about channeling, or about channeling, scheduling. So there's a brief overview. One thing I will note is, we were setting the timings, the date range, and so on. It's very important that your actual devices, right? So the devices that are powering your digital signage out in the real world, out in the field, right, behind those TV screens, or maybe the TVs themselves, have the right time and date set, right? So every single device out there, every computer, period, laptops, etc., have a date and time set. It's important that they pull the right date and time, right? Because if they think it's 2 days, 2 days ago, 8 hours off, well, your schedule's not going to work too well. So that can often be something that if you're more on the content and publishing side, the communication side, you might need to work with your IT team. You can certainly work with our support team if you think the timing is off on your devices. But on the kind of IT side, right, that's super, super important, because if the device thinks it's the wrong time, well, it's going to show the content at the wrong time too. So that is one thing I wanted to mention. Another question that came through on scheduling that I see here in our log that I think I submitted ahead of time is a question about the scheduling board, or that we use to actually show different content or different events within Appspace, maybe tied from 365 or Google Calendar. There's a question around showing different types of information, different formats. In this case, I think actually showing some class information. So I did want to hop into that real quick while we're on the scheduling topic, and then I'll check to see if any other questions came in. But I'm going to jump into my content library. I clicked on create a card, went to workplace. That's where we have our different workplace services cards. I'm going to open the schedule board and just show some of the built-in options, and then we can talk about maybe some other tweaks. So I'm going to load the schedule board card. I'm not going to connect to any provider to start because we want to keep this quick and easy. So I'm going to preview the card in demo mode just to get us looking at what that schedule board looks like. So again, this card can tie to 365. It can pull in live events for different rooms, whether they're conference rooms, meeting rooms, training rooms, classrooms. Don't really care. If it's got a schedule, we can pull it and maybe show what's happening in those rooms. This schedule board allows for a few different formats. You'll see up here at the top, there's a layout option. This is the default schedule option that shows kind of this flight board view of what's happening both now and in the future. We can tie in maps and floor plans, not really what we're talking about today, but you'll see those options here. And there's also a current event view that might show just what's happening right now or what's coming up next if nothing's happening. So for example, here in this Park Sooner room, right, we've got a huddle in an hour, but nothing right now. Really great for just that kind of quick at-a-glance view of what's going on. So that's what I thought of first when I saw that question. In fact, I could even come down here to my configuration options and disable interactivity to kind of get rid of that book now. You'll see it kind of slid down, or it scrolled down, so it'll automatically scroll through all the rooms when it's up on a digital sign. So if it is like a purely passive view of what's happening, that might be the way to go. The other thing I'll mention is that if you're looking at our schedule board card and it just doesn't quite match exactly what you want, you don't like this view, you don't like the other view, it's our single room card isn't quite cutting it for what you have in mind. It's a great opportunity to talk to your account executive, your account manager at Appspace, or your customer success manager, maybe your day-to-day contact, right? Because we can actually build out custom views as well. So if this just isn't going to cut it, you have something very particular in mind when you're pulling that calendar data, but show the exact right data in the right format and so on, we might be able to build something for you there. Let me take a minute while we're still on the topic of scheduling, see if any questions came in, or Damon, I don't know if you saw any that are related to the topic. Otherwise, we might jump to something else.
Yeah, there's one question. At this end date, will the content go inactive in the channel, or what happens to the content at the end date?
Yeah. So let's jump back to our channels here. It's a good question. So when you're setting up scheduling in a channel, the content isn't going to leave the channel. In fact, this is great because I actually have some expired content in my channel we can take a look at. It's not going to get removed from the channel. It's not going to get automatically deleted or anything like that. If that schedule ends, you're going to get something like what you see here. So you'll see that little scheduling icon. Hopefully you can see it on my screen is actually showing up red. And if I mouse over, it says expired schedule. So this was set to only run April 1st to April 30th. So that means that this channel published to a digital sign out in the world, right, is not going to be showing this content. Still technically in the playlist, it's just not going to show up on any screens anywhere. The reason we do that is we have plenty of situations where maybe you need to do a recurring schedule. So okay, you schedule for that time, but it's coming back around next month, something like that. You could certainly go back in and expired content easily remove it from the playlist. But again, it'll still be there for the time being in case you realize you want to extend the schedule or something along those lines. It will just be flagged as expired and won't show up on your signage.
Perfect. I think that was the last question we've gotten from scheduling. We've gotten a couple of questions on publishing.
All right. So yeah, let's jump into publishing. This is a topic that I end up working with a lot of our clients, our customers on when they're looking at best practices, how to set up their deployment and so on. So happy to dig into that. Let me pull up our questions here. So we did have a couple of questions around publishing multiple channels to a device and kind of how that works, how it functions, how to do it in the first place. I think it's a really powerful tool, a really powerful way to publish content. So I definitely want to jump into it here briefly. So let's start with the how-to, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So to that end, there are multiple ways to publish channels to a device in Appspace. In fact, what I'm going to do is open up my main menu and I'm going to navigate down to devices. Now, when I jump to devices, keep in mind, again, this is my testing account. And we're looking at a bunch of stuff. So you're going to see a bunch of devices here, a bunch of test devices. A lot of them are offline because, well, it's a test account. But I want to show you here on the devices page the different modes you can set a device in. In fact, you'll see some of them here under channel. If I click into a device, it's going to ask me what type of mode I want. User browses published channels, channels will autoplay sequentially, or administrator selects a single channel. These are the three different publishing modes in Appspace. What we're going to focus on for this question, or for actually these couple of questions that are related, is this middle mode, autoplay sequentially. So browse published channels, that's our built-in kiosk mode. That's great for touch screens and things like that if you're doing content on demand, kiosks, and the like. That's its own kind of topic. Administrators select a single channel. That's great for a very locked down digital sign when you want a device to only play one channel. That's all it's ever going to do. Maybe it's a very tightly curated playlist of content. Maybe it's a single purpose device, like for example, a tablet, like an iPad or a Crestron tablet or something like that, or a Cisco Navigator that's only showing room booking, right? That's all it's ever going to do. It's just a room booking panel. Well, you might use that mode. But for a lot of signage, especially, this autoplay mode is really great. This allows you to publish multiple channels to a device and have them all play out sequentially. So if I select autoplay, we'll hit save. You'll see this device. I picked the second one here. It now says autoplay. It doesn't tell me what channel it's playing in this list, right? It's not locked to a single one. It's actually just waiting to get channels published to it. So what that means is now that I've set it to autoplay, I can go back to my channels and start publishing individual channels to that device or to a location, to a device group, right? Whatever I want to target that, but that device will pick up these channels. So if I go back into this corporate news channel, I go to publish, I can actually just start typing, right? Find that device or device group and publish to that device. It's going to pick up this channel as well as any other channels I publish to that device. So this is really, really handy, especially when you've got multiple different channels of different types of content, maybe different levels of publishing in terms of how far this content goes or how widely it gets published, as well as who can manage it, right? So a corporate news channel like this might go to every screen you have. It might be managed by just one or two people at the very top corp comm level or something like that, or HR level, right? So this publishes everywhere, and then you might have a more local channel. So Damon and I are in Dallas, so you might have a Dallas office channel that only goes to those screens, is managed by a local Dallas person, for example, but those Dallas devices might get both channels. They're in that autoplay mode, so they're gonna get both. One question I did see come up along the lines of multiple channels and autoplay and so on is how do you determine the order, right? What's gonna play first, what's gonna play next, and so on. By default, with autoplay, the channels are gonna play one after the other. So in my example, I just kind of outlined where you've got your corporate news channel and your local office channel. They're gonna play one after the other, all of corporate news, all the local office, and they're actually gonna play in alphabetical order. That's the standard. So I guess if it was named a local office channel, right? C, it becomes before L, so it would play corporate news, then local office. So that's the default functionality. I did see this question come in ahead of time, so I went ahead and pulled up a Knowledge Center article that's relevant because we've added some extra functionality. Actually, this just got updated in a recent update that came out, I don't know, just a few weeks ago, actually. It's pretty recent. That lets you really kind of get creative with how those different channels are going to play back. And it's through something we call playlist interleave. So I just clicked on the link to jump down to this part of the article. This lets you add some player properties to a device or to an entire location to affect all the devices to customize how those autoplay channels are actually going to interact with one another. If you're not familiar with player properties, we've got a great article on how to add these. They're basically little kind of keys or properties you can add to a device to tell it to do kind of something different than normal, right? So like I said, by default, normal is going to play one channel, then the next channel, then the next channel. With these properties, you can have it play content from each kind of back and forth. So the very basic setting this to true, right? Playlist interleave to true, that means it's going to play one item from each channel. So in that very simple scenario, right, the corporate channel and the local channel, it's going to play the first item from corporate, first item from local, second item from corporate, second item from local, right? It's going to go back and forth between the two. Great way to mix content. You'll see this is a pretty detailed article. We've got all kinds of examples here. You can really kind of dig in here and customize that feature with these different options that we have. I'm not going to dig into it on this webinar. Honestly, it might be worth its own webinar because there's a lot you can do here. But I recommend maybe looking this up. I don't want to volunteer demand, and what we're going to send out after the webinar, maybe we can include this. I don't know what we've got planned there in terms of a follow-up, other than reaching out to folks where we're not going to be able to cover the questions on the channel. But it's great to dig into, great to play with. You can really customize how you want to mix that up, how it's going to behave. Like, is it going to, if you've only got like 4 local items and 18 corporate items, how is that going to work when you run out of those local items? Does it just keep re-adding them in? Does it just play through all the corporate and then go back to the local once you've played through all of corporate, right? That's completely customizable. So there's a lot you can do to kind of interleave or interweave, whichever term you prefer, those channels. Publishing, so a couple of the questions. I also check my time. I want to make sure we get to as much as possible. Somebody mentioned, this is kind of under publishing, kind of under content. Somebody submitted a question around archiving used cards so you can access them again in the future. Maybe not publishing so much, but it's related to publishing, right? What's currently being published out to the screen. I would say best practice there is in your content library, either create a separate folder. So maybe here under my HR library, I might create a folder called archive or something like that, where I could actually take content and I could drag it over to that archive, just kind of keep it separated, right? Maybe separate from my other content. Great way to kind of keep things in the right spot, save it for later. Then you could always maybe drag it back to a more active folder or add it from there. You could even create a separate content library. For those on the call that don't know this, your content libraries are tied to your user groups. So you could actually use a user group in a very non-traditional way, create maybe like a backup user group or an archive user group, something like that. That would give you an entirely separate content library, kind of like my HR users library here, or my content admins library, where you could even drag content to an entirely different library to have it there. Just have it completely separated from everything as a way to kind of save it for the future. One of the questions that I saw come through is actually diving into the world of advanced channels. I don't know how deep in the weeds we'll get on this particular webinar, but the question was around advanced channels and running playlists and kind of pulling in different content sources, different playlists with those advanced channels. For those that aren't familiar with advanced channels, they let you kind of carve up the screen, do all kinds of interesting things. They are kind of the advanced portion of signage in Appspace. We named that for a reason, right? It's kind of getting into the almost like Photoshop side of things, right? Where you can really, really customize, kind of go crazy with how your screen is laid out, how you layer things on top of each other. And within those advanced channels, you can actually have multiple playlists going on at once. So the question is, can I feed in maybe a playlist of content from elsewhere into those advanced channels without using a function we call link media zones? Again, this is getting into the weeds, so for those who don't know what I'm talking about, bear with me, but I wanted to address the question. Right now, there's not a way to do that. You're going to use the link media zone functionality to kind of link different zones and different channels to each other. We've looked at different options in the past. In fact, I think you'll likely see some development down the line along those lines to pull in different playlists within our multi-zone templates. Maybe not within advanced channels. I haven't seen it on the roadmap. But if you're not familiar, when you create a new playlist channel now, we actually have what we call our different multi-zone or device app templates that let you carve up the screen in kind of predefined ways. So if we get anything functions like that, it has been asked for before. This might be a good spot to keep an eye out for that in the future. Let me check to see if any questions on publishing have come in. Damon, if you see any that have caught your eye, feel free to throw them my way.
Yeah, there are a few, I guess more so on channels while we've been discussing channels. So one of the questions is, are multi-zone playlist channels compatible with all supported third-party devices? I have multi-zone playlist channels that look great on the Appspace preview, but on my BrightSign player, only the main zone plays out.
So multi-zone channels are compatible with all devices, but there are a few caveats. I'm going to jump to a multi-zone here to start. So one, they will work on any supported Appspace device, but like I said, there are some caveats. So the first thing I'll point out is that, well, they're more complex. You've got more going on. You can have a lot happening on the screen at once, which means that performance can be an issue. So of course, Appspace supports a ton of different devices. Even within certain device ranges, we support different types of devices. So for example, we support BrightSign, but there are a lot of BrightSign players if you're familiar with those devices, right? All the way from the LS, all the way up to the XT in terms of kind of price and performance point. So one thing to be aware of, if you're publishing a multi-zone channel to a device, you want to be aware of that performance, right? If it's a lower spec, like a very bare bones Windows player or like a BrightSign LS device, well, they're not really designed for this type of intense digital signage. They're designed for more full screen content. So you might see some performance there. I always say test it, right? I'm an engineer, right? That's in my title. I'm always going to say test it, make sure it's going to work for you. So that's one thing I'll point out in terms of device support. The other thing, and I think I know what we're talking about here based on that question, is that these multi-zone templates are going to work best with the single channel mode. So going back to those different publishing modes, right? Autoplay versus admin assigns a single channel. With multi-zone, you're going to want to use the admin assigns a single channel mode. These aren't really designed, at least by default, to kind of rotate through with other channels. Because, well, we've got a lot of different zones here, and one zone might finish its content, but another might not, right? So we have to, it kind of complicates the ability to just play one channel after the other when you have different timings and all these different boxes on the screen. So for that reason, if you do the admin assigns a single channel and it select one of these multi-zone channels, that's going to work fine on any device. If you have it in autoplay, it will just select the main stage zone. So you'll see I have this main default zone here. That's what's going to play full screen as part of that autoplay rotation. So you can do it, but you're not going to get the full multi-zone experience. It's going to pull out the main stage and it's going to play through it like it's a regular playlist channel back to back, kind of going back to that earlier example. So I think that's probably, based on the question that came in, that's probably what you're running into. So again, admin assigned single channel is what you want for multi-zone. I know I've gotten some feature requests to kind of have that autoplay compatible with multi-zone. We'd have to work out a way to do that. So that's kind of an ongoing discussion internally. It hasn't made it on the roadmap yet, so can't promise anything, but that is some noted feedback.
Okay. Couple more questions here on channel, and then some of these will lead kind of right into like our next session. So the next one is, I have a YouTube video on my channel. When I preview on my computer screen, it shows up and plays just fine, but does not show properly on my display. Most of the time, it doesn't even show it, but every now and then it will try to play it. So it spins for a few and then goes to the next card. So it looks like there are some issues with this YouTube video.
So two parts to this question. So one, when you're dealing with a YouTube card, or let's say the WebView card, different cards like that pull in external content, right? The YouTube card is pulling live from YouTube. The most important thing to keep in mind is that it is the digital signage device itself that is going out to YouTube to get that video. The Appspace cloud servers, we aren't like going to YouTube, downloading that video, sending it to the device directly via our servers. It is literally telling the device, hey, you need to go to YouTube, pull this video, play it at this time, this scheduling, all the good stuff that Appspace sets up for that. So if that device can't get to YouTube, or its internet connection isn't very good or whatever, right, it may likely have trouble. And I have run into that before, where YouTube is maybe blocked on corporate networks, or the network that device is on won't allow the device to get to YouTube. So that's the number one thing to check. Depending on the device, right, again, really low spec devices might have a little bit of trouble streaming that content. That's usually not an issue, but another thing I'll throw out. But again, number one culprit that I would expect is that the device itself can't get to YouTube, which means that either A, it'll reach out and try, or we actually do a little bit of preloading of cards, right? So before the card actually shows on the screen, any card, we try to kind of get it loading in the background. So what I anticipate is happening when you say that sometimes you see the loading screen, sometimes it just skips over it. Is it in the background? We're trying to load that, it's failing to reach YouTube, so we're just kind of skipping past it. We try to be smart about it, but again, depending on response times and network, bandwidth and all that, might be faster to determine that we're not going to be able to load it than others. So that might be what you're running into. What I would 100% would suggest, though, in that case, if it's not like, if you don't go to your IT folks and say, oh yeah, it's blocked, right? If that's not the obvious answer, get a support ticket submitted. You can do that right here via Appspace if you're a support administrator. If you don't have the ability to submit a support ticket, which I don't on my account, right? You have a little support option. You can work with your account admins in Appspace and they can get one submitted, or you can reach out to your customer success manager. They can help you out there too, because we can always dig in. Our customer care team's used to those type of scenarios, so we can dig in with you, see where the issue may lie.
Okay. Next question is there a way to add sound/music to a channel? Our TVs have lots of rotating images and we would love to have background music playing without uploading a lot of MP4s. And also for this question, they're working with an advanced channel, if that helps.
Okay, so there are ways to do that. In fact, in an advanced channel, you could very well do that. Again, for those who aren't familiar with advanced channels, will bear with me here. You're gonna see, oops, helps if I jump to the right channel. So I'm gonna jump into an advanced channel. This can be done with advanced channels, but I don't wanna leave the answer at that. So we'll start with the advanced channel situation because that's what the question asker is currently using. You could do that, and that's where the flexibility and kind of power of these advanced channels comes into play. So for example, if I look at an advanced channel, I've got one here. This is a very built-out advanced channel. It's got a lot going on. It's kind of my sample, kind of sandbox advanced channel. You could potentially add music in the background. So with an advanced channel, you might have a media zone widget, as we call it, that's showing content. In fact, let's jump to the preview so you can see what I'm talking about. So here in this particular layout, I've actually got a few different widgets, one of which is a media zone in the middle. I think it's showing a video. I'll wait for my connection to catch up here. That's looping through content, right? It could be looping through your slides, your images, like you said. You could essentially add an extra media zone widget, add it in the background, and essentially add music files to that. So if you have like MP3s or something like that, you could actually add that to that zone. It would just hum along in the background and play that music. So for example, rather than wait for my preview, let's just jump into the editor here. So I've got my layout, it's got my content playing, but I want that background music. I might go to add widget, choose to add a media zone. Typically a media zone is what's going to show an image or a video or something like that, or a playlist of images or videos. But in this case, it's just going to have the background music. So I could even make that a 0x0 zone, right? I doesn't even have to take up any size on the screen. I could add it to the very back, right? So I'll add my media zone widget. I could actually take that, we'll rename it music. We could drag it to the bottom of the widget list so it's behind everything else. We could even make it a 0x0 widget so it literally doesn't take up any screen space, right? Because all it's doing is playing music. And then just like any other media zone, I could jump in here, go to my content tab and add my music file. So that'd be one way to handle that. I've seen that done in the past. It'll just play kind of in the background. Now the caveat, right, is if you've got videos that have audio as well, you might get some conflicts, different things trying to play at the same time. That's probably not a good experience. So you got to be cognizant of what's playing and when and all of that, but that is possible. One thing I wanted to note, this isn't exactly on topic, but is very related, and that I wanted to point out because I think it's relevant to some of the questions we've already had, some questions that I imagine are coming, that I've seen are coming, is that a new thing to Appspace that I'm really excited about is that we've actually published publicly for everyone on this call to see, everyone not on this call to see, our roadmap. And we've added the ability for everyone, all Appspace users, to actually submit feature requests. So the reason I'm bringing this up now is that we do have an option to do that in advanced channels, but there's no background kind of soundtrack option or whatever you want to call it, background music option for our standard playlist channels at the moment. But I actually think that's a really great feature request. So I wanted to highlight this real quick while we're all together. If you go to our Knowledge Center, hopefully you're familiar with this, it's docs.appspace.com. You can also find a link on our website. Now, if you go under releases up here at the top, we've always published our release notes. You can kind of see what we've come out with, but we've added a new section for product roadmap. And again, I'm super excited about this. So we have a public facing product roadmap. So you can see here, there are three different tabs. We've got launched. You want to see the things we have released. If you don't want to dig to the release notes, kind of see a nice at a glance view, support for LG WebOS 6, our quick post feature, etc. You can see what we've planned. So these are things we're committed to on our roadmap. We are going to do, we just haven't released yet. You can kind of scroll through by different categories, see all this good stuff. You can click in, get more additional information, like one that we're all very excited about, which is embedding all of the functionality of our app into Microsoft Teams. You'll note when you click into these, you can also rank how important it is to you. So if you want to give us an indicator like, hey, I love this, please get it out as soon as possible, or it's fine, you know, not a priority for us, feel free to rank that. You can also see things that are under consideration. So this is where that's even more important. So if you see things that like we're looking at doing, but we haven't committed a firm date to yet, another great way to rank that. And down here at the very bottom, there's a lot to look at, so we can scroll down. You'll see there's a plus button. You can actually submit feature requests directly to us. So you're always welcome to reach out to the Appspace team members, your customer success manager, your account manager. If you're working with one of the engineers on my team, right? Yeah, throw those ideas at us. We can submit it on our side, but we've opened this up for everybody. Any Appspace customer to be able to submit ideas. So if you know, again, I'll take a note on kind of the background music, background audio thing. But if you want to jump in here, you can actually submit this directly to our product team. Our product managers who control the roadmap to determine what our developers are going to come out with next, look at these directly. They can see that ranking. They can see how many people have requested it. So, right, if we have tons of people asking for that background music option or anything else, right, we're going to know that's a hot item. We're going to start working on it. So I wanted to, at some point during the call today, during the webinar today, highlight this because one, I love giving visibility into what Appspace is doing to all of our customers and everybody interested in the platform. And two, I really wanted to highlight that if my answer today is we don't do that yet, throw that in here. Again, we'll take notes on our end, but the more feedback we get, the better, the easier it is for us to prioritize, to get those kind of features out. So I really wanted to take some time at some point to highlight this. All right, so I'll get off my soapbox on that. Let's go to the next question, Bond.
All right, perfect. And then for the next question, we've gotten questions on like creating content and some content related questions.
Sure. So I know we had a few submitted ahead of time. One is actually one of the questions that kind of dealt with content, kind of dealt with publishing. It's a little bit of both, so I'll highlight that. It was really about managing a broad deployment, right? 100+ screens, 1,000 screens, however high you want to go. How do you manage that? How do you get the right content on the right screens? That's where I would really point towards that autoplay mode. Either autoplay and using multiple channels or folder publishing. So again, this kind of bridges the gap between these two topics, so I do want to touch on that briefly. One option when you're managing a bunch of different screens, and for example, maybe 60 of those 100 screens all get your standard corporate content. You don't want to go to every single screen and add that content, like click 60 times, add content. That's a nightmare. No one wants to do that. Certainly I don't. So that's where you're going to look at some ways to kind of streamline that process. One way is to use the autoplay function, right? So going back to my example earlier, I've got this corporate news channel. That's where I might have my devices in autoplay. Say it's 60 out of the 100 devices that need that corporate content. Great, I'll publish it to all 60 of those devices. So I can just go into corporate news as I'm managing my content, add a piece of content here, and you know it's going to go out to all those devices. That's one way to handle it. The other way to do it, and I've seen this used very successfully, is to use what we call folder publishing. And I think, at least in one of the questions I saw come in, this got mentioned, but wanting a little bit more detail. So let's say you don't have kind of a standardized single corporate news or corporate content or global content playlist. You know, you've got really unique playlists for all these different screens, but you still have some content that needs to go everywhere. You might go this route. And that's to add a folder of content to those different channels. So for example, I've got my channel here. I can click add, I can go to my content library up here at the top, and I might select a single folder of content that I want to add. So for example, in my HR folder here, I think I've got some stuff. Yeah, we'll do this. So in my HR content folder, I could actually add the entire folder. So you notice when I mouse over it over here at the left, I get this little checkbox. I can check it. Or if I'm just in the content library, I see my folders up at the top. I could also click here to check it, and you'll see it says one folder selected. I can add that to my channel. So what that does is it's going to grab the content out of that folder. You'll see I've got a dashboard here that it's pulled in. It's coming from that HR content folder. I can see that HR content folder linked here as well, but that creates a live link. So what that means is that if I go back to that library, right, and I add content there, in fact, let's do that. I'm gonna make this simple. Let's drag this We're gonna copy this into that folder. So there we go. Now I've got that hot desk image I was using earlier in my folder. If I go back to my channel now, there we go. There's that content I just added to the folder. So that creates a live link. That means you can just drop content in that folder, and it's going to go to every single channel that has that folder added. So it's kind of another way to go about that, right? You could have that folder linked. Maybe it's a folder that only you as kind of the top level corp comm person or something, communications person have access to. You can drop your content in there, and it'll just go out to every single channel that has that folder added. So another nice way to manage that. Other content questions, one came up around modifying cards. I know this was one that was submitted ahead of time. So if I go here, my quick actions, or go to my content library and create a card, we'll dig into some of these templates here. Our different card templates do give you a lot of options. If I jump into a template, I've got different fields. I can edit the headline, I can edit the summary, I can maybe swap, things around, adjust margins, etc., right? Things like that to adjust the look and feel a little bit. If I add a logo, I can kind of drag the logo around. So again, if I swap the image to the left, I might want to drag the logo to the bottom right. So there are some customizations, but there was a question around, really customizing these card templates. So for example, I can come in here in my summary. I can maybe add some additional text. I'll do it the quick and lazy way and copy paste, that sort of thing. I could adjust some spacings, add in some extra margins to kind of adjust my content that way. But I think the question asked mentioned there's no drag and drop for these particular fields. And that is true, right? We try to keep these very streamlined, very straight and narrow. The templates are by default designed to be, not complete free form, but pretty kind of, I guess, guided in terms of how they're utilized. That's because a lot of times we see these end up getting branded and locked it down for day-to-day content creators. So if you're a communication person, I have no doubt you've got some content creation skills. You probably want that level of access, but we want to make sure that these are streamlined for folks that, well, that's not their day job, right? A local, like a team manager just publishing something out to like the local digital sign, or maybe publishing just something to their team in Microsoft Teams or something like that, right? We want to keep them very streamlined so they're not like overwhelmed with options, they're not going crazy with it, right? Keep them on the straight and narrow. But if you do have kind of a vision for cards that maybe our default templates don't quite cut it, I did want to highlight that you can work with our team to create custom card templates. In fact, actually, we open that up for anybody. Anybody with a little bit of skill in HTML can do this, but we have a dedicated team, a dedicated content team. They can actually create custom card templates just for that purpose, where you say, actually, I love this template, but I need more flexibility here, or I need this to work this way, right? We can work with you to create those custom templates. So that's another one where I'd say reach out to your customer success manager, your account manager, and so on. We can work with you on that sort of thing. I have no doubt we have probably some more questions that came in on content. So let me see if I can pick out a few, or Damon, if you saw any really good ones, feel free to throw them my way here.
Yeah, and then while I'm looking at those, we had a question on the integration between Microsoft Teams and Appspace. And if so,
Yeah.
what's the functionality and how does it work?
I did see that one come through. I meant to jump back to it. So we do have integration with actually multiple enterprise messaging platforms. I'd say Microsoft Teams is probably the most popular, but we also integrate with Slack, as well as WebEx as well. So WebEx's messaging platform. We do have that integration. I think somebody actually, when I saw that question come through, they pointed out that I had this little Teams icon here at the right in this playlist. What that means is that this content is also getting published to Teams, or rather this channel is also getting published to Teams. So I'll show you two things. One, I'll show you how to set that up and what that looks like real quick. So if I jump over to my Publish tab for this channel, you notice I have multiple publishing options. I can publish it to devices, that's traditional digital signage, right? A screen on a wall, a kiosk, something like that. I can publish this channel to users. That would be publishing to our employee app. If you're not familiar with that, you can always show it off, but we have our own app. You can publish, communications and messaging, let people book desks and things like that if you're using our space reservation tool set. That's where that comes into play. And then we have this category for apps. This is where I can publish into one of those enterprise messaging tools. And here you'll see I am publishing to Microsoft Teams. So if I click add, it's going to ask me how I want to publish. So again, any of these tool sets, I've got a bunch set up because again, I'm always demoing this and testing it and so on, but I might choose Teams or I might choose Slack. Once I choose one of those tools, it's going to ask me what teams or what chats I want to publish to. Now I'm using a little demo account, so I don't have a lot of chats available to me, but you see I can select what chat I want to publish to, and then I can choose how it's going to publish. So what's that post going to look like? What elements is it going to include? Is it going to just show a quick caption or be a full article? We'll see that in a second. what's going to happen if somebody clicks on it? Is it going to open in the Appspace employee app? Is it going to do nothing? Is it going to open a referral link? So if you want to refer people to an intranet site, right? How is it going to publish? What happens if you update posts or remove them? Is it going to remove them from Teams, right? You can completely customize that. On the team side, I'll show you a live example of what that looks like. So we'll jump in. I'm going to drag Microsoft Teams over. Here's that content, right? So this is what it looks like published in Teams. So this is that same content from that corporate news channel, but published into Teams. Anyone in this chat essentially is going to see this content. They could see the content itself. They could see an extra blurb or information. They could have a click-through link if you want, so on. Now, one thing I will point out, because this isn't something that everyone uses, right? You might not even know the Teams integration exists, or maybe you only use content on the digital signage side. There's extra functionality you can add to your content. So you'll notice this opening April 11th piece of content here. This is one of our cards. It's been published here in Teams. If we publish that card to a digital sign, we're only going to see the card, right? And you probably don't want a bunch of extra stuff. There's no reason to have a link on a digital sign. No one can click that. But you can add extra context here. In fact, you'll see I added some extra content just now while we were doing our live demo, and it actually published to Teams because that's how I have this channel set up. But there's not a lot of extra context here because I was just grabbing random content. So one thing I want to point out, if I go back to my edit and I jump into this content, either here in the channel or in my content library, whatever the case may be, if you're editing a card, editing a piece of content, could be an image, could be a video, and I'll have my edit where I can adjust this card. There's also an article option here at the right. So you'll see I've got this little blurb here. I've actually added a link to a tutorial video. This is where it's going to pull that extra context. So the article, again, some Appspace users never touch that because maybe they're just doing signage, but if you start publishing into Teams, if you start publishing into our employee app, this article feature becomes really, really useful and really handy to add that extra context, right, above and beyond. Context that makes sense in Teams where people are actually going to read it, they're going to have time to digest it, versus a digital sign where you just need a quick, bold, kind of, easy to absorb message up on the screen. So wanted to highlight that too.
Perfect. Content question, how do you transfer content that's in the common library into my group? I created content this morning and it usually appears under my group, but for some reason it's showing up in common library.
So when you're looking at the content library, you might have multiple different content libraries. So any Appspace account by default is going to have a common library. Everyone might have access to it, maybe just the admins. It depends on how that was configured. And then you might have other libraries as well. By default, there's going to be a My Group library. When you've got an Appspace account, there's at least one user group. It's called My Group. It's the default name, and it's going to have a corresponding library. If you add additional groups, additional libraries like I have, you might have additional libraries here. It depends on what level of access you have, how you want to organize, right? It's all into user governance and so on. But in your case, if you want to move content between libraries, you certainly can. It actually is just a drag and drop. So if I jump into my common library here, I've got a bunch of content, a bunch of stuff. Maybe this benefits enrollment piece of content here I actually meant to put in my group or meant to organize elsewhere. I could select it, there's a little checkbox there, or I could click and drag to maybe grab multiple items. You'll see I can just click and drag and move it over to my group. Or if I've already got some subfolders set up in my group, like I do here, I might click and drag and move it to a particular folder. Now, what I'll point out is when you do that, it's going to give you a little bit of a message here. When dragging content across libraries, a copy of the content will be created in the destination library. Do you want to proceed? So that's the one caveat here, is when you drag between libraries, it is going to make a copy of that content. So you're actually still going to have that content in the common library because we don't want to mess that up. What if somebody's using it? What if it's already published from there? But it will create a copy in my group and you can start using those copies. If you drag content within a content library, so I just want to move this to a different folder in the common library, it will actually move it. So that's one bit of caveat. Again, we give you that message, but something to be aware of. But that drag and drop is going to be the easiest way to do that.
Perfect. Next question. For several things like the weather card, you can easily customize the color. Is it possible to add new fonts? This allows our company to stay within brand.
So for our standard communication cards, if I click on create card here, right, I've got different categories, standard communication or what we call announcement cards. You can embed custom fonts. In fact, in the admin view, you can do that. You can add custom fonts, utilize them, and so on. For some of the other cards, that hasn't been implemented. Like the weather card, pretty standard. You can define the location. But that's really about it, right? If I go down to my weather card here, I can define, the unit it's going to use, some of the basic options, but we don't have the font options exposed. Two avenues there. As I mentioned before, when it comes to custom cards, we can work with you to create a custom card if we need to maintain that brand standard. That's one option. And I'd say work with your account manager or customer success manager. Reach out to us. We can work with you on that. This is why I hyped that product roadmap feature here. Because it's not just a default option that can be exposed, 100% recommend you jump to this new product roadmap feature. Again, here in the Knowledge Center under product roadmap, submit that as something you want. So that way, again, we'll take that feedback on this call for sure, but the more we see that pop up here, the easier it is to prioritize to get that feature out there. So I'd recommend maybe dropping that as an idea here for us to just make an easy option where you don't have to work through us to do it.
Perfect. And then actually there's a question kind of in line with your Teams question. Is there a similar function that you demonstrated in Teams for Slack or Outlook?
So for Slack, there definitely is. In fact, actually Appspace, we're a Slack company, though I'm on Teams and Slack and WebEx all day because I talk to all kinds of different people, but we use Slack a lot internally. So there's a similar option for Slack, same kind of configuration, same setup. You're just generally publishing into Slack channels. I don't know if I've got a great example of that, but for example, we have a new hires channel. I'll drag that over real quick. You can kind of see we're publishing new hires here. You can peek into some folks that just joined Appspace recently, but same kind of concept, right, for Slack. As far as Outlook, we don't have content publishing into Outlook currently, right? Most of that is going to be handled through Teams, where most people kind of live and do their thing. But with Outlook, we do have an Outlook plugin on the space reservation side. So that'd be like desk booking, room booking, things like that. You can tie in our services. Publishing content via Outlook, we'd have to figure out how that workflow would work, but happy to take that again as a feature request as well.
And then one question, how do we properly upload content with vertical content where the TV monitor is set up as such?
Okay. So this one is an important one to touch on, I think. And in fact, this kind of addresses some other questions I saw come through in terms of like content being extra zoomed in and things like that. So there are two parts of this that I want to make sure to cover. So one, when you've got screens that are rotated, maybe they're portrait orientation, right? So the screen's on its side. We can certainly support that. Appspace supports that 100%, but there are some important caveats. Now, one thing I'll point out is if you create a card in Appspace, so if I go back to my card creation thing here and I choose a card template, we'll go back to the one I was in earlier, our templates are going to automatically adjust to those different formats. In fact, you can preview it. You'll see when you're creating a card, there's a little button up here that says switch orientation. You can see what it's going to look like in portrait. Now, you don't have to create different versions. Like this isn't locking it to one of these different orientations. This is just showing you what it's going to look like when it plays on that type of device. So our built-in templates are going to automatically adjust. So if you use a card, you don't have to worry about it. Publish it to your landscape screens, your portrait screens, it'll automatically adjust. You don't have to reauthor. So that's the easy answer for that. Now, if you're uploading content, right? So if I go back to my content library, I click upload, I'm uploading an image, a video, something like that. Well, we can't automatically adjust that easily, right? If it's an image file, well, it's landscape or it's portrait, or if it's a video file, it was recorded or created in that format. So there's no way to automatically adjust, but there are ways to change how it's going to show up on those different displays. So if I go to my channels, this is actually where we're going to see that type of setting. So I'm going to jump back to that corporate news channel we were in earlier. There are aspect ratio settings. And again, this can relate to both how content shows up in portrait and landscape. And also, again, I saw some other questions around like content that looked like it was too zoomed in or things like this. This is where I think that's going to come into play. So in my channel here, up at the top right, you'll see I've got my channel timing. So right now I've got a 1 and 42 second long playlist. If I click on that though, you're going to see some default settings. So default transitions, default duration for content, and default aspect ratio. There are 3 main options. Fill, uniform, and uniform fill. All these are going to behave a little bit differently. This is, again, really going to come into play for your images and things like that you upload that maybe don't exactly match the orientation of the screen. Fill is basically going to stretch and skew it, right? So it's going to make this fill the screen no matter what the aspect ratio is. So if you've got a portrait display, but you publish a landscape piece of content, it's going to stretch it to fit, which might mean it's a little bit distorted. Now it's going to fill the whole screen, which is great, but it, again, might be a little bit distorted. Uniform is classic letterboxing, right? So you watch a 4:3 movie on a widescreen screen, you get the letterboxing, whatever the case may be, right? Same kind of idea. If you do uniform, it's going to maintain the original aspect ratio, and you're going to end up with some blank space. So if you publish landscape content that's wide on a portrait screen, you're going to end up with some blank space at the top and bottom of that content if you choose uniform. Lastly, uniform fill, which is the default option, is a little bit of a combination of the both. So what it's going to do is it's going to fill the whole screen, but it's not going to stretch it or skew it or shrink it, right? So it actually means you're only going to view part of it. So if you can imagine, I'm getting a little conceptual here, a portrait display with landscape content, it's going to fill up to the top and bottom of that portrait display, but you're going to end up with like essentially the edges, right? The outer sides of that content kind of cut off. So it really depends on the content type, how this is going to behave. Best practice, as always, is to make your content that matches the orientation of the screen, which if you're doing a lot of content creation outside of Appspace, again, images, videos, traditional media files, might mean you might need a portrait playlist and a landscape playlist to make sure the right content goes to the right screen. But these aspect ratio features can help quite a bit if you're just blasting content everywhere, no matter what that orientation is, and it's not those responsive cards. This is probably where you want to look to make that show up correctly. We got a lot of questions. I think we're going to run out of time here, so there's probably going to be a lot of follow-up or another webinar. But jump to the next one.
There will. We had another more question on the link media zone. That is it possible to assign to multiple channels all at once, or do you have to go to each channel to link? They have 100+ channels. I'm looking for a quicker way to assign to multiple channels all at once. Will this possibly be an option in the future?
Yeah. So let's dig into that a little bit. I didn't expect so many questions on kind of the advanced channels and linking media zones. That's fun stuff. So let's let me jump back to our channels. So again, if you're not familiar with this concept, bear with me. Some of our customer base uses it, some do not. But essentially what this lets you do is when you've got an advanced channel like this, you can link a zone to a different zone, pull in content, right? So you can have a bunch of different advanced channels, all pulling content from a single source. So if I jump into a media zone, I'm going to jump into this little video zone here, go to my content, I've got this link media zone option. So I can actually tell it, go to this other zone and pull in content. So one part of the question is you can link multiple zones. So I could say pull in from all of these different zones. Let's jump, right? Even a different channel here, right? I can have this pull in content from multiple different zones. So that's part of the equation, right? I could have a channel pull from a global playlist, an HR playlist, right? All these different playlists kind of pull content in and display it. The important thing to remember with linked media zones, which I think gets to the heart of this question, is that you're always linking to the content you want, right? So in this question, they said they have 100+ channels, looking for a quick way to assign to multiple channels at once. What I'm guessing is you've got 100+ local channels, right? All these local channels for local locations, local sites, local screens, buildings, whatever your breakdown is. And you want all of those local channels with their unique local content to also play some maybe global content, something like that. With linking media zones, there's not much way around that other than going to those local channels and linking to the global content. Because again, you always link to the content you want. So I might go to my Dallas channel, link it to the corporate content. I might go to my Tampa channel, link it to the local content. My New York channel, link it to the local content, or to the global content rather, right? So you're kind of linking each of those back to that main playlist of content. So currently, that's the way you're gonna have to do it. It's a one-time step, right? Once you do that, it's set up, it's done. You don't have to worry about it in the future, but it does require linking each of those kind of local advanced channels to maybe your global content playlist or your HR content playlist or whatever you need there. Currently, there are no plans to kind of change that workflow. That's pretty well baked in. We've got a bunch of people already deployed with that workflow. What I would say, or what I typically recommend, and this may or may not be helpful to you depending on your use case and how you're publishing, is to really evaluate whether the autoplay function with those playlist channels could work for what you use. Now, if you really need the other functionality of advanced channels where you're carving up the screen, doing all kinds of widgets and craziness and stuff like that, might not work. But if really what you're just showing is content on a screen, classic digital signage, a lot of full screen content loops, maybe you have multiple things on the screen, but that could be solved by a card template, then doing the autoplay with those playlist channels might be the way to go, because that is a simple workflow, because it's almost the other direction, right? You say, okay, I've got my corporate playlist, blast it out to all these screens. I've got my HR playlist, blast it out to all these screens. I've got my, Northeast US playlist or my Germany playlist or whatever, hit all of the screens in Germany or hit all the screens in Northeast US. It does kind of go the other direction when you're doing that autoplay publishing with your playlist channels. So if possible, if that would work for your use case, that's what I recommend investigating, playing around with. But if you really need the functionality of advanced channels, you need to do that linking. This is the way we're going for now. And again, can always submit a feature request.
Yeah. And first off, Will, thank you. I think you definitely demonstrated you're one of the smartest people at this company. So thank you for all the answers and the help and the demos. Thank you all for submitting questions. We've kind of reached time. So if we weren't able to get to your questions, we will follow up with you through email. And then we'll also be sending out this recording. So just in case you may have missed a part, if your question got answered, you missed some of what Will said, you'll be able to go back to it and watch it. Thank you again for coming. And then also, Appspace will be coming to many cities near you. We've got a lot of conferences and trade shows that we'll be presenting at. If you go to www.appspace.com/events, there will be opportunities for you to get help, talk to the team. Hey, you can even meet Will in person. He is a delight in person, please believe me. So if you're going to Realcomm or Infocom or any of those, please join us, meet us there, meet the team. We've got great giveaways. And then thank you again for coming. And we hope to see you soon. Hopefully we'll hold another one of these pretty soon. So thank you again and have a good rest of your day.